Get your free copy of the complete tutorial at www.teachucomp.com/free.
In QuickBooks, you use the EasyStep interview to quickly and easily create your company file. You complete the EasyStep interview by filling out entry screens with information in the different sections of the interview. You must complete the required general section first, though. In most of the sections of the interview, if questions are posed that you must answer and you're unsure as to how to correctly enter your answer, don't worry. You can usually go back and change your answers later. A few questions, however, will ask you to make a decision that's not easily reversed. When this is the case, you'll see an exclamation mark and a bright yellow triangle next to those questions. To create any company file in QuickBooks through the EasyStep interview, you begin by selecting File from the menu bar and then choosing the New Company command, and that will bring up the EasyStep interview. Each section of the EasyStep interview, listed at the right side of the interview screen, is divided into multiple tabs that display at the top of the EasyStep interview screen. As you complete each tab, QuickBooks will put a blue check mark at the top of the tab to indicate that you've completed that section. When you've completed all the tabs in an entire section, QuickBooks will place a blue check mark on the section tab, like General, at the right side of the EasyStep interview. Now, it is recommended that you set up a company file that is not your company file but is similar in nature, a dummy company, if you will. That way you can practice the transactions that you'll be likely to enter into your own company file without placing your own real company file in jeopardy. It is possible to create as many company files in QuickBooks as you would like. Also, if you set up a fake company file, it can be easier to train others in your company in the basic bookkeeping involved with the company without risking your actual company data. Now let's look at the main sections of the EasyStep interview and what we'll accomplish in each section. Now in the General section, we're going to enter company information, choose a preliminary chart of accounts, set default preferences, and specify a business start date. You must complete this section before you can leave the EasyStep interview. In the Income and Expenses section, we'll review the income and expense accounts in our business's chart of accounts and also add new accounts. You can't rename or remove accounts at this point. In the Income Details section, we're going to decide whether business income is from services and or products that we sell. And based on our responses, QuickBooks will determine what parts of the Income and Accounts Receivables feature you're going to be using. So you also set up your accounts receivable here. The Opening Balances section allows you to enter information about the customers who owe you money as of your start date, vendors to whom you owe money as of your start date, and all the balances in your balance sheet accounts, all as of your start date. The What's Next section just describes some common tasks in QuickBooks that you may want to complete after you've gone through the other sections of the interview. Now let's look at stepping through the EasyStep interview. First, we'll need to complete the Welcome section. So you can start by clicking the Next button at the bottom of the EasyStep interview screen to continue to the next screen. This first screen simply informs us that we can find a QuickBooks Pro advisor to assist us in setting up our company file if needed. Click the Next button to continue. In QuickBooks 2005 and 2004, the next screen will ask you if you want to create your company file by converting Quicken data. If you aren't, then you can just click Next to continue setting up a QuickBooks company file. If you do want to do this, however, then you can click the Convert Quicken Data button, which launches the important documentation window, and you can just click Convert to launch the Convert a Quicken File dialog box where you can select your Quicken data file that you would like to convert into a QuickBooks file. In QuickBooks 2003, or if you just clicked Next in 2004 or 2005 instead of converting Quicken data, then the next screen will just mention that you can skip the EasyStep interview if you're comfortable setting up your company files on your own, but this is not recommended for new users. So instead, let's just click the Next button to continue using the EasyStep interview. Now the next screen tells us the ways we have of getting around in the EasyStep interview. You click the Next button to continue to the next screen, or click the Prev button to go back to the previous screen in the EasyStep interview. It also mentions that you can click the Leave button in the lower right corner of the EasyStep interview window to leave and come back at a later point. However, you must complete the required General section first, or you will not save your company file. So just click the Next button to continue. Next, it mentions that the EasyStep interview is broken into sections and topics, so we just click the Next button to continue to the next screen, which tells you that you can feel free to change your answers at any point. However, questions that are difficult or impossible to reverse will be indicated by putting this symbol next to them, a yellow triangle with a thick black exclamation point inside it. Click the Next button to continue. That's it for the Welcome section. Notice that QuickBooks has placed a big blue check mark on that tab at the top of the EasyStep interview to indicate that you've completed it. Click the Next button to continue to the Company Info tab of the General section. When you click Next after completing the Welcome section of the EasyStep interview, you'll begin the Company Info section. You can just click Next again to open a screen where you will enter your company's name. Then click Next again to enter your company's address and contact information. You fill out the screens by typing the information into the appropriate boxes and pressing Tab on your keyboard to move from box to box in the form. As with all screens in the interview, you will press Next when you're finished entering information into each screen to continue on. After filling out your address screen and then clicking the Next button, you will need to fill out your company's tax ID number or Social Security number and select its starting months for its fiscal and income years from the drop-downs available. Click Next to move to a screen where you can then pick the type of tax forms your company will file based on its legal structure, which you can see in the drop-down. When you click Next to continue, QuickBooks asks you to select the company type from the industry list that most closely resembles your own business. From this response, QuickBooks will create a default chart of accounts for your company. It will also set up other types of lists that would be appropriate for your company, such as payment methods, customer and vendor types, and payment terms. Now, if your company type isn't listed, just select the one that most closely matches it to get a head start on creating your chart of accounts. Later on, you can modify it if you wish. When you click Next to continue, QuickBooks informs you that you can look for setup tips with small green arrows next to them through the rest of the interview. Just click Next to continue. The next screen informs you that QuickBooks is ready to create your company file now. Click Next to continue. QuickBooks will launch a File Name for New Company dialog box. Use the Save In drop-down to select where you want to save the company file if you wish to change it from the default folder location. The company's file name will default to the name of the company which you entered in the first screen of the interview. You can change it if needed by typing in a new name. And when you're ready to create the company file, just click Save to continue. Now, after creating the company file and saving it to your computer, the next screen that will appear in the EasyStep interview will display your income and expense accounts. Review the accounts and note what accounts you would like to add or remove. Unless you want to create every account in your chart of accounts by hand, then you'll want to click the Yes option to accept the accounts given and just click Next to continue. QuickBooks will then want to know how many people will need to access your company's files. In QuickBooks 2003, answer that question to finish the Company Info section and move directly into the Preferences section. In QuickBooks 2004 and 2005, when you click Next, you'll have to create the admin user account. This is the name of the master user of your QuickBooks file. If you type a password for the administrator, never lose it or forget it. If you click Next without specifying a password, QuickBooks will urge you to set a password. You can click No to continue without setting up a password, or you can click Yes to just create one and click Next to continue to the Preferences section. In the Preferences section, you will need to answer questions about your business that will indicate to QuickBooks which features will need to be turned on or off. Many of these features can be enabled or disabled in the future in the Preferences dialog box that you can select from Edit in the menu bar of the company file. The different features that can be set on or off in this section are sales tax, your default invoice format, payroll, estimates, progress invoicing, or partial billing as it's sometimes called, time tracking, using classes, bill payment method, or accounts payable, reminders, and finally, whether you want to use cash or accrual accounting as the basis for your reports. So once again, throughout each screen in this section, answer the questions posed to you in each window as is appropriate for the company file you're creating. And when you're done with each screen, just click Next to continue to the next screen until you reach the Start Date tab. So when we click Next, it asks, does our company maintain inventory? And you just simply would respond yes or no as appropriate, and then click Next. Then it asks if we collect sales tax from our customers, and once again we choose yes or no as appropriate. If you click yes and then choose the Next button, it'll ask if you collect single tax rates paid to a single tax agency or multiple tax rates, or do you have multiple tax agencies. And if you have multiple tax rates or agencies, you will need to set the sales tax up outside of the interview. If you collect a single tax rate paid to a single tax agency and then click Next, you can actually set them up in the EasyStep interview. And once you've filled that in, you could just click Next. The other thing it will ask is your default invoice format. We have 3 by default. Product, which has fields for product businesses like bill to and ship to, ship via. Professional, which is for strictly service only. It just has one description column and an amount column. Service, which is a little bit more flexible and could do both. Or, as we'll look at in later lessons, you can create your own custom invoice. So choose the one that you'd like to use by default and just click Next. Also, it will then ask if you want to use QuickBooks to manage payroll, and you can choose yes or no as appropriate, and click Next. It will then next ask, do we prepare written or verbal estimates for our customers, which might be called quotes. Either way, in QuickBooks we refer to them as estimates, and we have to answer yes or no to enable or disable that feature. Also, if we issue multiple invoices from a single estimate, then we would want to answer yes to the progress invoicing preference. Also, if you would like to track the time that you or your employees, or even your vendors, spend on each job or project, we would answer yes to the time tracking command. Also, if you have segments of your business which you want to keep a close eye on, you can use the QuickBooks Class feature to define these segments and then track associated income and expense by classifying all the bills that you receive, all the payments that you make, all the invoices that you send out, using classes. And so this is an optional feature that some businesses would like. A lot of times it's used for departmentalization, or if you have a few smaller companies that file as one at the end of the year. You could differentiate between them using classes, but still set them up as a single company file so that you get a single balance sheet at the end of the year. Then you have 2 ways to handle bills and payments. You can either enter the checks directly, or just enter bills first and enter the payments later. And typically, if you want to deal with payables, you'll want to enter the bills first and then enter the payments later. If you're a very small business, perhaps with not very many bills, then you could enter the checks directly, but choosing the second option enables your payables. So let's choose enter the bills first, enter payments later, and then just click Next. Also, the reminder window. It's a list of all the things that are due or that you need to act on, such as bills to pay, checks to print. How often do you want to see this reminder list? We can choose at startup, only when you ask for it, or rarely. And let's just choose at startup so that it's being useful and reminding us of things we would otherwise forget. And then click Next, and our preferences are completed for this particular company. Once you've completed the Preferences section, When you click Next, you'll go to the Start Date section of the General tab. Now in QuickBooks 2003, to complete the General section, you simply need to enter in a start date for your company. In QuickBooks 2004 and 2005, you will need to decide what date to use as well. However, the option of using the beginning of the year is offered, as well as the ability to set a different date. So what is the start date? Now this critical piece of information is probably the most important aspect of creating a company file that has accurate beginning balances. The start date is the starting point for all of your QuickBooks accounts. The start date is the date for which you will provide QuickBooks all of the necessary information on the balances in your accounts. So because of this, you may want to pick a date that isn't too far in the past, since you will have to record every one of your company's transactions that have occurred since that date through today to create a company file that's accurate financially and also able to be used for the daily data entry. Many people will choose to use the last day of their last financial period, such as a quarter or a month, as their start date. And remember that you will have to enter in all of the transactions that have occurred since the start date through today, or at least accurate journal entries representing the transaction values, in order to use the company file and have accurate balances. So don't go too far into the past if you don't want to spend hours performing data entry. So enter the starting date in this window of the EasyStep interview, and then just click Next to continue. Now that'll end the General section, and you can just click Next to start the Income and Expenses section. When you chose an industry model for your business accounts in the EasyStep interview, QuickBooks made some default accounts that many businesses in that industry would use. The Income and Expenses section of the EasyStep interview allows you to add accounts to your income accounts and your expense accounts. Now in this section, you can just select No to all of the 3 questions that will be asked as you click your way through this section. While it's possible to add accounts here, you can't delete or rename accounts here, so you may as well save all of the adding, deleting, and renaming of the income and expense accounts until later. These accounts can be easily changed immediately after completing the EasyStep interview. However, you can and should add any accounts for which you need to enter opening balances in order to create an accurate balance sheet. So if you need to add accounts, then you can just click Yes at Adding Accounts, and then just type in the account name and enter in an opening balance. And you can see it in your income accounts. When we get to the opening balances section, we can simply input the amount that we had in that account as of the start date in order to create an accurate balance sheet. At some point, though, you do have to answer no to the question, would you like to add another, in this case, income account, in order to progress. And then it's repeated for expense accounts. Now you just repeat that as needed until you arrive at the Income Details section. Now the next section of the EasyStep interview is the Income Details section, and you should at least complete the Introduction tab of this section. This will tell QuickBooks whether you need an accounts receivable account and whether you want to be able to record statement charges. So on the receipt of payment screen, it asks if you receive full payment at the time or before you provide a service or sell a product. And if you answer always, the interview assumes you do not need to track how much money people owe you because they always pay you immediately. And basically it won't give you an accounts receivable. So we would want to answer sometimes or never in order to enable an accounts receivable, and then click Next. Then it asks if we would like to enable statement charges. Statement charges allow you to assess a charge directly to a customer's accounts receivable account without having to go through the bother of invoicing them. These charges can then appear in a billing statement, which could be sent out monthly or quarterly, periodically, however you would like to set it up, for companies that do that type of billing. However, in order to do that type of billing, you have to say yes to using statement charges, and then just click Next to continue. Now you can also set up any item on the Items and Inventory tabs. You can set up service items for work or services you provide. You can also set up non-inventory parts for materials or products that you sell and buy but just don't track as inventory, materials that you purchase for resale to a specific customer, or materials or products that you sell but don't buy. So for example here, it says a farmer might grow strawberries and therefore would need to set up a non-inventory part for the sale of strawberries. So you have to choose whether you would want to set up any part or not. Now if you want to set these items up at a later time, you can skip this section and just do that after completing the EasyStep interview. And we also can set up other charges for just miscellaneous charges like shipping or freight. Now you can also set up inventory items. Now for inventory items, QuickBooks will track the quantity and value of these items as you purchase and sell them. So if you had an initial inventory as of the start date that you want to add, you can input the items here. However, you can also set these up after you've completed the EasyStep interview if desired. So if we wanted to add an inventory part, let's say we chose yes and clicked next, we'd first have to give the item a name. Then we put in a sales description as we'd like it to appear on our invoices and other sales forms. Then you can enter in the sales price, and this is the price per unit. This is what you're going to sell it at. Now, if it changes, if it fluctuates, then you can leave it at 0 or you can just put in the most common sales point. You can always change this as you're invoicing. So this is really just a default that we'd be setting here. And if it's a taxable item, you would want to check taxable item and click next. You then have to use the income account drop-down to choose the income account used for the sales of this item. Click next, and then you can put in a purchase description used for when you create purchase orders for this item. And how much the cost is to you to buy it. And once again, this is just a default value that can be changed in your purchase orders if needed. Also for inventory, you can enter in a reorder point, and QuickBooks will remind you, through the reminders list, to reorder the item when the quantity on hand is at this point or lower. And you can enter 0 if you just don't want to be reminded. Then you can enter the quantity that you had as of your start date and the total value, which once again, if necessary, can be adjusted here. And then you would just click Next. And it tells us we've set up an inventory item. If you want to set up more, you can just simply click Yes and click Next and repeat that cycle until you're done. And at some point, when you're finished, you're just going to choose No and click Next to complete inventory, and click Next to move to the opening balances section. The opening balances section of the EasyStep interview is where you enter in the amounts owed to you from customers, amounts you owed to vendors, and the balances in your balance sheet accounts, all as of your start date. So it is recommended that you enter in the opening balances from within the EasyStep interview. If you enter your beginning balances in the EasyStep interview, it will make it easier when you're ready to use QuickBooks for daily business transactions. The opening balances are important to your balance sheet. Without accurate opening balances as of your start date, QuickBooks cannot create an accurate initial balance sheet. In addition, if you start with accurate balances as of your start date, you can reconcile your QuickBooks bank accounts with your actual bank statements, and your QuickBooks checking accounts will show the actual amount of money that you have in the bank. And the opening balance for a QuickBooks bank account is the amount of money in the account as of your start date. Now you can determine this amount in one of two ways. You can use the ending balance on the last bank statement for that account that was on or immediately prior to your start date, or you can use an actual balance sheet prepared by your accountant, and the latter option would of course be the most preferable. Now in QuickBooks 2004-2005, you'll also have an additional screen that asks if you wish to print your checks and deposit slips in QuickBooks in this section, and that just wasn't available in 2003. You can certainly print checks and deposit slips, but it did not show up as part of the EasyStep interview. So we just click Next to begin, and it tells us what we'll be adding, and it reinforces what our start date is, and so you'll want to make sure that you have the balances listed as of that particular date. So then we click Next again. It tells us information that we'll want to have on hand. Click Next again. And here we can start to set up customer balances. So here we would input customers who owed us money as of our start date. So when we click Next, it asks if we had any customers who owed money as of the start date to add. And if you had them, you would click Yes and click Next. And then it asks if we want to track jobs for any of our customers. And we can say yes or no and click Next. And then we would give the customer a name. If they have multiple jobs, you can check has multiple jobs, and you can actually set up different projects or jobs for that particular customer. Or if not, you could uncheck the box and just input the balance that was due on the start date. So let's say Sally owed you $500. You could type that in and then just click Next. If you'd like to add another customer or job when you're finished, you can answer yes and click Next to cycle through one more time. But at some point, you're going to have to choose no when you're finished and just click Next. Once you're done with your customers and click Next again, you basically go through that same process with your vendors. And note that it says, generally in QuickBooks, a vendor is anyone you receive a bill from. So this could include anybody from suppliers to subcontractors to utility companies. So those are the people for whom you'd want the balances, and once again you click Next. So do you have any vendors to whom you owed money to on your start date to add? And you can answer yes or no as appropriate. So let's say we did have a bill that was outstanding as of our start date. We would say yes and click Next. We then enter in the vendor name and put in the balance due on the start date. Maybe a utility bill, for example. So whatever you had, just input that, click Next, and then you can cycle through and add all the other vendors whom you owed money to as of your start date. At some point when you're finished, just choose No and click Next, and your vendors are completed. When you click Next to continue, then we go through and repeat the process once more with the accounts in our balance sheet. So these are broken up into different types of accounts. So when you click Next, it'll ask if you have any credit card accounts that you want to set up. And just note that you should not set up an account for a personal credit card, which you sometimes use for business, as it would show up in your chart of accounts for your company, which you wouldn't want. Do you have any lines of credit? Once again, answer yes or no and click Next. It'll also ask if you had loans or notes payable outstanding, or bank accounts. So for example, if we had a bank account we wanted to set up, like a checking, we would answer yes and click Next. And then you give it a name. Click Next. Put in the last statement ending date you had that was on or before your start date. Enter the statement ending balance. And you can enter in a bank account number if you'd like. And you can also be reminded to order checks when you print whatever check number you type into the check reorder number box. And then you click Next, and you've added one bank account. If you'd like to add another, you can click Yes, click Next, and cycle through it again. When you're done adding that type of account and inputting its balance, just click No and click Next to continue. And here for 2004 and 2005, it'll say, do you intend to print checks or deposit slips from QuickBooks? And if you answer yes, it just will bring up a help file after setup is completed, telling you how you can print checks and deposit slips. This screen did not appear in 2003. However, you could still print your checks and deposit slips. It just didn't show you the help file. So just go ahead and click Next. It will then introduce you to assets, looking at the asset accounts that you might need to set up. Once again, we've already done checking, or the bank type accounts, so these would be mainly fixed assets or other assets. So do you want to set up any kind of an asset account? Once again, answer yes or no, give it a name and a balance as needed. It then introduces us to equity accounts, and when we click Next to continue, it shows us the equity accounts. And this is based on the type of legal entity that we set up. So this particular company file that we're creating was a sole proprietor, and so we have equity accounts that would be appropriate for a sole proprietorship versus, say, a corporation. You cannot add equity accounts at this point. That would have to be something that would be done later on if you need to make modifications. So when you're ready, just click Next, and your accounts and the opening balances are then going to be complete. After completing the opening balances section and clicking Next, you'll go to the What's Next section of the EasyStep interview. The What's Next section shows you the tasks that you may want to set up after you finish the EasyStep interview. You simply click through this section, reading the information on each screen. Now, when you're completely finished, you can click the Leave button in the lower right corner to return to your company file. And at that point, you can enter in any additional information that you need to create for the company file and enter in any remaining beginning balances that you need. Then you have to input all of the transactions that have occurred since the start date through the current date to bring QuickBooks up to date. And this will then allow you to enter the daily transactions for your company file as they occur.
Like what you see? Pick up your free copy of the complete tutorial at www.teachucomp.com/free.